All right, I think we're ongoing. Good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm Bob Weathers here from the Vitality Project, and I'm here with my friend Michael Morar tonight.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to have you, Michael. I just shared with Michael right before we met tonight that I've gotten some series of hard news flashes today close to home around COVID, so I'm a bit more muted tonight, and I still want to meet, and I'm happy to be here with you, Michael. Still want to meet, and we'll discuss what we discuss, and maybe I'll just hand the mic to Michael. our topic tonight has been posed by Michael, and I did my best job, Michael, of giving it a title. What really does it mean to be under the influence? And maybe we can go for 10 or 15 minutes just with this topic, and then wish everybody happy holidays, and we'll be back again in the new year. But let's see. I'm interested to hear from you, Michael, and I'm sure something inside of me will want to respond, but we'll just play it by ear.
Yeah, Bob. We weren't quite sure what topic we wanted to go with tonight, and actually, I was thinking about this even maybe last time we met or the time before. Not just how when people are under the influence that they're being influenced by alcohol or drugs, but it's also in more of an overall way. I think it's influencing how decisions are being made, thought processes. So it's kind of like this idea that even if someone hasn't necessarily been drinking that day or using, is that regular use or use in which has then started causing problems in people's lives, I think then interrupts the flow of making good decisions, of thinking about things the way that we'd like to be thinking about things. And in an idealized, as best as possible, kind of given the context. And I think sometimes it just makes it challenging to then, and why I think this is important is because it makes it challenging on how we're managing the problem. So like the problem itself makes it difficult to manage the problem.
Say a little bit more about the last statement. I feel like I was right with you, Michael. Just say a little bit more about the last statement. I want to get that.
Yeah, sure. So I think in general, sometimes the problem itself makes it difficult to manage the problem. I think that about a lot of things, but specifically as it pertains to substances, is that it makes it difficult to then start making the decisions that we'd like to make.
Yeah.
To kind of move into a different place because of being under the influence in a more broad, general way that may or may not have anything to do with being intoxicated.
Yeah. Michael, this one cuts close to home to me, and it's something that we've shared before. I don't know if we've shared it online before, but what the heck? 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, I was sitting before the Board of Psychology here in California after the better part of a decade of working to get my license in psychology reinstated. And I've shared this with you on more than one occasion, but I was sitting before them, and a professor from your alma mater and mine too, ironically, was on the board and asked me, he said, so because I made a whole series of catastrophic decisions that had led to my loss of license, and I was framing my incredibly poor decisions. I was not making excuses for it, but locating that within about a 15-year period of declining into more and more serious addiction. And his question was, so are you saying that you were drunk or high when you made these decisions? And my response, I can still remember it. I remember very clearly because it still stands there. I said, my response was, no, sometimes, but rarely. I mean, I didn't teach or see clients, high. I didn't do that. I said, but there's a condition in that's common in the addiction research referred to as hypofrontality, which is one way to talk technically about what we're talking about today, is that in active addiction, whether it's to alcohol or other drugs, only one part of that active addiction is intoxication. I can be drunk or high, and it's obvious that I'm drunk or high, but that especially in active addiction, once it develops some momentum, the forebrain, the frontal cortex, is so compromised, and it's been shown now in the last 20 years with brain scan research, is pretty, you can't argue against it. And I said, that's what I was. I said I wasn't drunk or high for 15 years, but I was very compromised, increasingly compromised. And again, I fell hard on the sword of my own addiction. I mean, I take full responsibility as much as you can for that, and full responsibility for recovering. But as I shared with you, I still remember, it's a humorous aside, but the court reporter was sitting right to my left. I was in this tribunal with the Board of Psychology. There were a dozen of them in a kind of a horseshoe thing. Just scared the living daylights out of me. I can't even believe I could remember my name. It was so intimidating. And so I was doing the best I could to be honest, for one thing, and also to answer them in intelligible phrases because I was so anxious. And I can still remember the court reporter. She was doing that stenography machine, and she said it was during, we took a break right after that conversation. God knows I needed it. And she said, could you please repeat to me that word you said? And there's something about it that was dear to me. And I said, hypofrontality. You know, hypo is under and frontal is your frontal lobes. It's underneath your frontal lobes. And so she said, thank you. She wrote it down. But what I was struck by, the tenor of that conversation, and I realized that this is an extreme situation, had the Assistant Attorney General of California really coming after me on this very point. She said, so are you saying you were drunk or high? And I didn't use the term under the influence, but I did use the term active addiction. I did talk about hypofrontality. And I said, the thing you've got to understand is that if somebody is an active addiction, they're quite compromised, and you can rightly indict them for that. And you've indicted me, and I understand that. But what one recovers is the capacity to be kind of all cylinders firing. And I said, I've been committed to that for however many years it was at that point. And their decision was that it hadn't been long enough. But the problem that was built into that, and I've shared it with you before, Michael, is that they had two reasons they didn't reinstate me. One is I hadn't been in recovery long enough. I think at that point it was maybe 4 or 5 years, and now it's a better part of 10 years. I felt like they had a right to do that. You know, it's just, you know, I always think of Shawshank Redemption. You know, how long before you guys say it? Okay. But the other point was really problematic to me, and it was written by the Assistant Attorney General, and it was consistent with what she was saying during that. She said, you knew the law and ethics of psychology, and you violated them anyway. And if anything I did during that 2 or 3 hour grueling thing was to make clear that, yes, I did know the laws and ethics of psychology. I said, I taught the laws and ethics of psychology to graduate students. I knew them. And I said, what we're talking about is what goes into the decision-making process and what would be referred to as good judgment or impulse, you know, all of that stuff. And it's like that fell on deaf ears. And that one I had a difficulty with, because I was basically saying I was under the influence, not as in the evasion or excuse. I take full responsibility for that. I was bringing to them my compliance with a rehabilitation program that was recommended by the Board of Psychology. I had adhered to that to the T, and then way beyond that. And this argument to me was specious, because they needed to listen to Michael Morar talk about what does it mean to be under the influence. And so I've stood by that, and at this point, I have few regrets. I've moved on in my life and in my career and so on. But it's problematic to me because others will face this, and it's in our profession. It's in our profession. And that level of ignorance of just the basic biology or psychology of active addiction, I think, is really, really problematic. And if it's in our profession, where you have people that are purportedly skilled in this, you know it's in our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what I think of when you say all that is that if we're talking about, if it is kind of some of these assumptions about the disease model, and that if that's what it is, if this is a disease, and if it is something then that you have navigated, unfortunately, what ends up happening is it's like it's a disease, and you're not given, when it lifts, it's not really viewed. It's viewed by a disease model in the ways you don't want it to be, and then you don't even get the benefits if there were any. I mean, I guess,
Yeah, I'm right with you. I'm right with you.
It's kind of like this wanting it to cut both ways, or it's like this double-edged sword, and it's kind of like, if you do want to call it a disease, and if that's what we're going to go with, then it seemed to me that the approach they were taking was more of this, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, that it wasn't, like, almost as if it wasn't reversible, like that you had, and it wasn't giving, the recovery part was giving far less weight than, what's the, I can't, like, terminal or something, I don't know, I can't think of the word, but it's deterministic.
I'm right with you, and I would have had far less of a problem. I even would go so far to say is I might have no problem. Are you there, Michael? Are you with us? Uh-oh. We have a frozen screen situation. I want to wait till my friend is back again. We're going to give him a second here. Want to make sure that he can hear us. And if not, I'm going to do what I can to get him back again, because I value what Michael contributes. Let's see. Michael, are you there? He's clicked off, but I'm going to keep my eyes peeled. You know what I'll do is I'll keep responding to what Michael and I were saying, in hopes that he comes back on, and I'll just keep my eyes peeled here. We're on a relatively new format referred to as StreamYard. It's kind of a older, no, it's a newer, actually, more advanced cousin, I think, of Zoom in some ways. And it seems like we might have fallen into a StreamYard glitch here. So what Michael is bringing up, here he comes, he's back again. You're back again. All right. Yeah. Are we good? Okay. That's good. I just paused. I just started talking. I waited because I saw that we froze up. Michael, I would have had a far less of a problem, and maybe even zero problem, at least eventually, if there had been no course of rehabilitation to say, once you've done this, you're done. I would understand that. I wouldn't like that, but I would understand that and find my peace with it. But I do feel like it's, whether it's a two-edged sword or a double message or a catch-22, I don't know. It's probably some version of all of those. There's something about saying, here's what you do to rehabilitate. Here's where the Shawshank Redemption comes in. Here's what we want you to do to rehabilitate. And we'll have you come back every year for the rest of all time before the parole board. This is right out of Kafka or something. And you'll plead your case, and then we'll turn you down. And I always love what Morgan Freeman, how he finally just said, I'm just done doing this shit, basically. And I think I would have been much more square with this if there had been, I think, a clear response, but there wasn't. It was like, here's your rehabilitation. Oh, no, by the way, I'm sitting there with them, and rehabilitation doesn't seem to even be on the table. It's what I've done. And it's a certain take on what I've done, which moves it beyond a disease model. It's kind of like we've just reversed to a moral model of addiction, which is that I'm a bad person and only bad people do this, and you should have known better. All this stuff. And it was dismaying to me, because it felt like it was a kind of a regression that not only didn't square with the entire process up to that point of so-called rehabilitation, but it felt like a reversion to an earlier era that I had hoped that we'd evolved out of, certainly in psychology, and I even want to say in jurisprudence, in the legal context. And it was really dismaying. So there's that.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. I might switch gears real quick, just around grief too. Is it? I mean, just as the grief that you're, or potential, grieving as it, loss and grief. I think also, and I'm switching gears kind of quick here, but to me they're kind of intertwined. Just as I'm thinking of, I'm guessing that. Well, it's grieving, that going the way that it did. I'm imagining that there's lots of grieving with that, and then there's also grieving with loss in people. I think in general, people struggle a lot around grief and loss that can also then create context for addiction to crank up again or to create challenges.
Yeah. Right now that our situation internationally is just rife with addiction right now in terms of relapse for those that have been in sobriety or in recovery, as well as vulnerability for those who maybe haven't been addicted to develop addictive ways of coping with the limitations and the loss of this terrible disease, COVID, that's plagued our world now for coming up on a year. So that is true. That is true. And maybe I'll just pause there for a second. I think we've got Michael frozen again. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm distracted by the technology. He may be back with us in a moment. I just want everyone who's watching us tonight or who views this to know that that I certainly, and we here at Your Vitality Project certainly have an awareness that it's not just words. When you read in the newspaper or hear in news reports about the so-called second epidemic, sometimes it's been referred to as a silent epidemic, is that we have a pandemic going on, obviously with COVID, but that right underneath that and directly related to that has been a horrible reversion to addictive behaviors for those that have been sober. Those that have been in treatment have been released early before the end of their treatment. So there's incredible vulnerability. The single greatest predictor of addictive relapse is psychological distress. And you don't get any more distressful than the threats that we're facing either to our own lives or those of loved ones, including loss, grief, death, and what it's brought up in terms of financial disparities and suffering. It cuts right to the quick of most any human being on the planet right now. And so when the dust settles, and God willing, the dust will settle more and more increasingly, especially into our new year, as the dust settles over the next year or two or three or five, I think what we're going to see are empirical evidences that point to the huge cost in an indirect way to COVID, and that would be the huge costs in terms of drug addiction. And I'm using drug addiction as a umbrella term for all manner of addiction, including alcohol and other drugs, but also behavioral addictions, and the fallout resulting from those addictions, particularly when I think of alcohol and other drugs, deaths owing to overdose and medical problems secondary to the addiction. I think we're just going to see a tsunami over the next year to 2 to 3 years that's directly related to what we're all attempting to survive right now, which is COVID. So, yeah. We've covered a few different topics tonight. This idea of being under the influence, I hope that what we're talking about makes sense, is that active addiction is so impactful because it's well beyond just what you would think of as being addiction proper. Most people associate addiction with some form of intoxication, and especially to substance intoxication, and to realize that for the active addict, as soon as they're finished with their intoxicated phase, many, if not most, move into withdrawal. And in withdrawal from the substance, there ends up arising cravings, which are powerful, and the cravings lead back to the intoxication again. And in that cycle of intoxication to withdrawal to craving to intoxication to withdrawal and so on, is that brain scan studies in the last 20 years have definitively shown that the frontal cortex, which is the seat of moral judgment, compassion, communication, caring, long-term planning, we can just go down the list. Most everything that makes you who you are is a function of the front part of our brain, and that is enough affected in active addiction that's actually referred to now. Addiction is actually referred to biologically as hypofrontality. That means under the frontal cortex, which is the midbrain and the brainstem. You get less and less traction in the forebrain. You lose what makes the person the person. So under the influence, and this is Michael's point in suggesting this topic tonight, under the influence ought rightly to embrace the whole kit and caboodle when it comes to active addiction. And being under the influence then affects decisions that are made, impulses that aren't controlled, personalities that change in a radical way to be ruinous in relationship and work responsibilities. It's the heinousness of addiction. As those of you that have been here before with me know, I don't really typically talk about the devil in conventional terms, but if there were a devil, and I believe we're talking about it, that devil is addiction and the enslavement that comes from addiction and the huge costs that are entailed in that. Michael's back here again. I'm going to have him come on so we can say, Michael, you're back again. I'm going to have you come on briefly because we're just getting ready to say goodbye. You popped in just as I was getting ready to say goodbye. I summarized what we talked about, Michael, in terms of the implications of this, and we can pick up on it the next time that we speak in a couple of weeks. I think I want to sign off in just a minute, but out of respect, I'd like to invite you to any final words that you have to say, and then we'll sign off for tonight, knowing that this will be part one of maybe a two-part, at least, conversation. It's a very important conversation, I think. I don't hear you, Michael. I'm sorry. Can you hear me, Michael?
How's that? Okay.
Oh, that's good. I hear you again. Sorry about that, Michael.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I'm just at a different location, so my internet's been a little wacky. So my apologies.
Yeah.
I don't have much to summarize just because I'm kind of, I'm kind of out of sorts now, trying to get back online. So
yeah, it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. To be stuck in this kind of purgatory technologically. Michael, can I just personally wish you peaceful holidays? You know, we're moving into Christmas and New Year's is coming up. For some, it's Hanukkah and other celebrations. And I just wish you and our entire audience peace. I hate to, Mary I've actually used that term because it's kind of cultural, but Mary feels a little bit over the top to me, especially in the context of our conversation tonight and even how we bracketed it by talking about COVID-related news that I've gotten today, and it touches close to home for virtually all of us. And I just wonder if there's a way, you know, I like the way that the contemporary spiritual author 𝗥𝗓𝗘 puts it. He says if somebody dies, and we'll just expand that to include if somebody's threatened with death, and we all are, it's impossible to be happy. I'll rephrase it. It's impossible to be merry. Okay, I'll leave it up to each person to decide. But he says it's impossible to be happy when somebody dies because it's impossible. But he says it is possible to be at peace. It is possible to find a peace underneath that, and that's a huge aspiration for all of us. But I think it's in that spirit that I would wish some modicum of peace for you, dear friend and brother, and for me.
Me too, Bob.
And for everybody who's listening. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll pick up in a couple of weeks, and I look forward to that, Michael. Blessings and much love to you, brother.
Yeah, take care, Bob.
All right, you too. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye, Michael. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Wish you safe holidays. Please stay safe, be well, and we'll be picking up in the new year with your Vitality Project with guests like Michael coming back. I appreciate your support this past year, and I look forward truly to a new year. All right. Good night.